Next, we have Professor Timothy Caulfield, who is a Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy and a professor in the Faculty of Law at the School of Public Health and the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. He is a Fellow of the Trudeau Foundation and a Health Senior Scholar with the Alberta Heritage Foundation for Medical Research. Professor Caulfield has been involved with a number of national and international policy and research ethics committees, including the Canadian Biotechnology Advisory Committee, Genome Canada's Science Advisory Committee, and the Ethics and Public Policy Committee for the International Society for Stem Cell Research, and the Federal Panel on Research Ethics. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. Welcome, Professor Caulfield.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a real honor to have the opportunity to speak with you today on a subject that I feel very passionate about, and that is the topic of science hype. Now, I was told that I should tell you about the sources and give some hints to solutions, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to start, though, by saying that it's important to note that hype pushes in both directions. I think people think of hype largely in relation to hyping benefits. But, you know, in the world of ELSI, we have something that myself and some other colleagues, including Bob Cook-Deegan, have called ELSI hype. ELSI researchers are under the exact same pressures, and that kind of hype can also be detrimental to policy discussions. But I am here largely to talk about the positive kind of hype that we always see. And this is becoming a very sexy topic, as Stephen has pointed out. You are starting to see this in the public sphere more and more. You're starting to see more skepticism in the public press, but also amongst the general population about what science has to tell us. And I think that's very important, so I think this is a very timely discussion. Okay, to the sources of hype. Well, there are so many, it is very difficult to enumerate them all, and they all play together, as I'll say in a moment. Myself and my colleague Celeste Condat wrote a piece where we called it a hype pipeline, and that's not entirely accurate, which I'll come back to at the end. But really, there are so many forces that work together to create, to hype, to spin what we hear about science and what we hear about research, particularly, I think it's fair to say, in the biomedical realm. From career pressure to funding pressure, to media spin, obviously, to vested interests. Now, all of these, as I say, they build on each other, and I'm just going to touch on a couple of them, some of the research for a few of these areas. The research itself, obviously, is hyped. The moment it leaves the laboratory, there's some evidence that research is hyped. And again, there's a lot of very interesting recent research, whether you're talking about medical studies, whether you're talking about animal studies. There's been interesting empirical research to show the degree to which those kinds of studies are hyped. And also there's some interesting research that shows the more competitive a research environment, such as the United States, the more likely you're going to have hyped research. And this was interesting work done in the context of social science research, humanities research, again showing a high degree of hype and a lack of ability to replicate the work. You can look at, so you have the research from the institutions being hyped, and then it goes, of course, to the writing up the papers. This is interesting research that shows that 40% of abstracts, now keep in mind, who writes the abstracts? The authors write the abstracts. 40% of the abstracts have some degree of hype in them. Then it goes to the press release, and there's lots of studies on press releases showing the degree of spin in press releases. And these guys had a relatively conservative definition of spin, and you see that half of the press releases have some kind of spin in it. And other research has shown this, again, showing that you have this spin that occurs, and that spin is then subsequently picked up in the popular press. I don't need to say a lot about the popular press. Everyone here knows that is a massive amount of hype here. And it's no surprise, right? Journalists have got to, as Roger Highfield has said, they have to justify their existence. Not only to the public, but to their editors. They've got to sell the story, right? And as a result of that, you get all these ridiculous headlines. And everyone here could put up, probably 100,000 of them, from justifying Justin Bieber, there's a little Canadian call out for you, to genes causing virtually everything, right? So you have these kinds of headlines, and that is to some degree direct result of all of the forces that I've just described. In addition to that, as you guys know, the headlines themselves are even further hyped, and they're not written by the authors. I think it's important to note not to blame the media for everything. In fact, some of our own work and work that other people have done has shown that, sometimes the media, well, I shouldn't say sometimes, our work has found that the media is actually relatively accurate in what they say. Many of the errors, I'm curious if my colleagues agree with me, are really what I call errors of omissions. They leave out important details. There's not a room, whether it's about conflicts of interest or risks, et cetera. So I think we have to be careful the degree to which we point our finger at the media. The other very important thing, this dovetails very nicely on this morning's conversation, is we have to remember this is a systemic problem. There are fantastic pressures on researchers today, commercialization pressure being just one of them. In my own country, it's become intense. Now, this is my very favorite examples. Maybe you've heard this before. This is President Obama's State of the Union address in 2011 when he said that this is our Sputnik moment. He wasn't talking about going to the moon. He wasn't talking about even just doing good research. He was talking about using research to drive the economy, right? That is a lot of pressure. He has said that we'll invest in biomedical research and create countless new jobs for our people, right? I mean, that is real translational pressure. And that also leads to another kind of hype, and that's the hype that's associated with partnering with industry and commercial interests. Now, I'm not saying that that is inherently wrong, but that invites a further kind of hype in the hype pipeline. And then we've already heard about this a little bit, and this is the tremendous career pressure that has always existed for researchers, and study after study has shown that that can lead to hype. And indeed, recent research has shown that, again, that the more competitive an environment, the more the pressure to publish exists, the more likely bias is ultimately going to find its way into the actual published research. I'd also like to talk a little bit of some of the underplayed sources of hype that people often forget about. I'm sure everyone here has heard the hype the sources of hype that I've already mentioned. Well, here are just a couple of my favorite. Something that's been called the white hat bias. This is the tendency for journals to publish and to report on studies that are perceived to be in the public interest or public good or noble. Right? So you have this tendency, now this has been done in the context of obesity research, but you do have this tendency to publish research results that seem to support the public good. You also have special interest groups. Now, and again, I'm not saying that in a pejorative manner, but you have special interest groups that push particular agendas. Again, that can result in a kind of hype. And then finally, you have the new media and its impact on research, whether it's Twitter. I've been tweeting about this meeting already, helping the hype situation. You have Twitter, you have Facebook, you have all these other sources of communication that further fragment the knowledge market, but also serve as a source of hype. Another one that's underplayed, and it seems frivolous, but it's not at all, is the role of celebrities. Celebrities can have a tremendous impact on how both the public perceives it, and this is some of our own work on the Jolie gene as it's been come to known. We found in the media reports of the Jolie gene, 68% of them, there's no mention of the rarity of her condition. A really good example, tangible example of how it can have an impact, and of course that can have a real impact on both the science, but also on how the public perceives the value of that science. So what are some of the ramifications associated with this? And I'm going to do this very quickly. There's so many, you guys. Premature implementation of technologies, perhaps the inappropriate exploitation by the market of science, poor research and funding policies. Some of our own work and other research has shown that hype actually impacts how science is funded and funding decisions. It can have an impact on the efficiencies of research. Now, I'm a believer in science. I think that the scientific method ultimately prevails, but hype slows down that replication process. It can have an ill effect on policy by making doing a poor job of informing LC issues. In addition to that, it may result in backlash, and this is still speculation, but as I said earlier, you're starting to see more and more headlines like this, like whatever happened to the stem cells? You've heard about these miracles. Where are they? Where are the miraculous genetic cures? Where are the miracle drugs, et cetera? And these are in the popular press. Now, some of the solutions here. Now, I called it a hype pipeline, but it really is a cycle of hype. All of these all of these forces feed upon itself. They're all complicit collaborators, and in the short term, everyone benefits, right? No one is really harmed. So that can be very problematic and make it very difficult to deal with. So I'm just going to put up some of the HYPE solutions, and we've already heard about some of them, and there are too many to go through. I do think we need to think about having real changes to the way we incentivize research, and I also think we need to face the impact of aggressive translation pressure. In addition to that, we need to think about new ways of promoting publication, and I also fully agree with education and media training. I'd like to end with this rather grand statement, and I believe it's very true. I think that increasingly in this time, in a time when science has become such a huge part of our lives, that producing and protecting good science is one of the most important functions a government can do in a liberal democracy. And I really believe that, and I fear that we may be failing at this task. So I'll end by thanking my wonderful team and all of the institutions that I hype my research for, and I look forward to your questions.
With no hyperbole, right?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.